Hey everybody, welcome to Tech Tuesday. This is Rick Uzzi. I'll be right back. Hey, thanks for joining me for Tech Tuesday today. Looks a little different here. This is not a green screen of a living room or of a foyer. This is actually my house. So I am practicing some social distancing today. Actually, our company is doing some testing on remote working in case we have a situation where we all got to be away at the same time. So I am practicing that today with a Tech Tuesday broadcast. So here I am from a different location today doing Tech Tuesday. What I'm going to be talking about today is just kind of an update on some broadband news that's been happening recently. So I just wanted to run through some quick stories and talk a little bit about that. Originally, I was planning on doing last week with Peter Livia. I did a broadcast about our remote spectrum tool that you can view downstream spectrum remotely using full band capture. Today we're going to talk about a tab in the TrueVision product that lets you do the same thing, although because of the fact that we're testing some of this remote working, Pete and I are not going to be in the same room, and we, again, social distancing, I'm not so worried about it, but the fact that I'm here and he's not, we can't actually do that. So today I'm just going to do some broadband news updates. You can chat with me if you'd like during the broadcast. Just go ahead and click on the little chat button there on YouTube and chat with me. I'll see those and be happy to, I'll see them probably at the end if I'm looking at some web pages here, but be happy to respond to that. So let's get going. So let's talk about what's happening in the news. So obviously, if you turn on the news, all you're hearing about is coronavirus, COVID-19. It's just everywhere. I mean, you can't get away from it. You can get away from the virus pretty easily, but you can't get away from the news, which is, I think, part of the problem is there's so much focus on it that people are really concerned and worried. But there's some good things going on. People that are having to work at home, and unfortunately, lots of businesses are closing. So people are either working remotely from home, which is a blessing to be able to do that, or unfortunately, there are some people that just literally can't work. So a lot of people in the service industry, if they work at restaurants, work at with a hair cutter, or work in a gym or something like that, all these places, movie theaters, all these places are closing down. I know there's other impacts on hotel occupancy is like 15%. So there's a lot going on. So we want to be cognizant of that. And just talk a little bit about what some of the cable operators are doing. For example, the NAB show, for one thing, was canceled. This is a huge show. It's normally got 100,000 attendees, National Association of Broadcasters, and that was canceled. And that, of course, is in line with all kinds of other shows that are being canceled. ANGA was canceled. Earlier this year, Mobile World Congress was canceled. So lots of these industry trade shows that people normally go to are being canceled or postponed. I'm seeing a lot of them are rescheduling for later in the year. They already have their dates and they're starting to notify people. So, maybe in August through September, October, we'll start to see these shows being rescheduled. But that's one of the things that's obviously going on. It's interesting that the NCTA said that their members are reporting modest but manageable amounts of internet usage as far as increase goes, changes. So that's good to know. But this would be a time when a lot of broadband operators might see some strain on their networks because obviously they've got more people at home during the day. Now they do prepare, obviously, for their peak times, which would be when everybody's home anyway, generally, right? So you have your peak prime time hours. Kids are home from school, parents home from work, everybody's kind of on the internet, streaming TV, doing all kinds of things. So they're prepared for that. So that might be why there's only modest usage in this case that they're reporting. But now in Spain, the carriers are saying they're seeing a 40% spike due to this virus. Here are some particular operators that are being mentioned, and 40%. Mobile use was up 50%, and they even mention WebEx. So you don't think about that, but these platforms like WebEx or GoToMeeting, those are seeing more use, obviously, because people are doing more remote meetings that they were not doing before. So that's another effect of this virus. And a lot of the service providers, operators are stepping up and doing some things. There was actually the FCC asked everybody to do certain things as part of a Keep Americans Connected campaign. You can see here relaxed data caps, open Wi-Fi hotspots, waive late fees, not terminate service to customers who can't pay, because a lot of these customers, again, they're being sent home because their companies can't afford to pay them right now. You know, we'll see what the government does with that, but they're being sent home, and they may be laid off or temporarily sent home. So we don't want to be cutting people off in a situation like this. So I'm glad to see that the whole country is coming together, and a lot of these operators are doing this. For example, Comcast, they are opening their Wi-Fi hotspots for free, and they're removing its data caps, waiving disconnects and late fees, and offering their Internet Essentials for free to new customers. So that's a plan that they make available for people, and they're opening that up and making that available for free. Charter's offering their free Spectrum broadband and Wi-Fi access for 60 days to households that have K-12 and college students if they don't already have a broadband account. So again, that's good for students that are now, that's the other issue that we have, students that are now home that are trying to do school remotely. I know my kids, they are in a hybrid school where they work remotely a couple of days a week, so they're kind of already set up for this, but a lot of schools now are scrambling to see how they can get kids to be able to do their schoolwork from home. And I know a lot of colleges have kind of suspended things until spring break, so that's got a lot of college students that are home now that ordinarily would not be. Charter is going to open up its Wi-Fi hotspots as well, and that's part of this connected Keep America Connected campaign. Cox is upgrading internet speeds for select packages, and a lot of the companies are doing this and not charging people for that, because obviously that is going to handle that need for more broadband speed. Altus, for households with K-12 or college students, again, they're making their Altus Advantage program available. And Atlantic Broadband is prioritizing network maintenance and service-related appointments to home. So that's kind of around the idea of we're going to have lots of people on, and we need to make sure they stay connected. So that's what they're doing. And then smaller operators, you know, there's a huge list of people that are signed up, of operators that have signed up for this effort. Smaller ones, Sparklight, used to be Cable One, making unlimited data available on all their internet service plans, so you don't need to worry about overages. Also deferring payment, people that can't make payments, deferring that if they make arrangements on that. T-Mobile, this is interesting. They've been granted the ability to use additional 600 megahertz spectrum for 60 days, and they've gotten some of that from Dish. Dish is providing their entire portfolio of 600 megahertz to T-Mobile so that they'll have additional spectrum to be able to handle the demands of broadband during this time. And then Canada, Canada is doing similar things to what we're doing here. So again, lots of operators are stepping up in this time right now, which is great. Okay, so let's see what non-coronavirus news we can talk about. You're probably tired of hearing about coronavirus news. So some of these stories were prior to this pandemic being called, because there was actually other news before that. So here's a report that says 2/3 of counties, their average internet speeds are slower than broadband. Well, what does that mean? Well, the FCC has a definition for broadband, and they're saying that data that the FCC has collected estimates that 21 million Americans, or about 6.5% of the population, lack access to high-speed internet. Now, of course, that depends on what your definition of high-speed internet is. So that's what the FCC determines. They say 65% of counties across the United States are averaging connection speeds slower than the FCC's definition of broadband. The FCC currently defines broadband at speeds as 25 megabits per second and upload speeds of 3 megabits per second. So that's the current definition, minimum definition for broadband for the FCC. And they say that 77% of small counties, 51% of medium-sized counties, and surprisingly 19% of large counties were averaging connections at speeds slower than that. So, and here's a quote: "Without access to affordable high-speed internet, workers in underserved economies are being left behind as employment opportunities are given only to those with access to information, education, and training." So, and obviously that's true all the time, but especially now, if you think about it again, going back to what we're dealing with this pandemic, it's very important that people have broadband, good, solid broadband at home. And this, again, was prior to all of the news breaking out about coronavirus. This was from a few days ago. And this is interesting too. So here's kind of the range of what they were looking at. So the average download speeds range from a minimum of 0.24 megabits per second in Cumberland County, Kentucky. And that, I'm assuming, that sounds like 240K, I believe. Remember when speeds were 240K? To a max of 281.71 megabits per second in Lamar County, Mississippi. So they have great broadband in Lamar County, Mississippi, which is nice to know. Something else kind of along these lines, the FCC, as far as rural broadband, the FCC has been for years trying to get better broadband speeds and service into rural areas, and that would be through increasing speeds, through increasing competition. They love to have competition because in addition to there being that competitive nature to get speeds higher, they're also trying to reduce cost, which is great. They don't want a monopoly. So there's a new thing. It's the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, and it sounds a lot like the Connect America Fund. It's kind of another stage of that, or another avenue to do this. So they're seeking right now procedures for this bidding that they're going to be doing, and that's going to have a budget of $16 billion, and they're expected to start this in October, so that's coming up. And they're again looking at ways to be able to provide higher speed internet into rural areas, high speed internet and low latency. So they're really going to be focusing on that. You can see here that a lot of this, there's been some contention in some places. For example, one of the people on the FCC didn't like this because the FCC is saying that we're not going to provide these funds to areas that are getting assistance from the state, for example. And what they're trying to do is not have people double dip. So if the state has already provided funds to be able to get assistance, and I would assume also if they got federal funds through another program like CAF2 or something like that, then maybe they won't be eligible for this. So I can understand the reasoning there, but there are some complaints about that. And then again, everything seems to be political these days. Even this virus is political, but one of the commissioners, the same commissioner, is saying that this is just 13 days before the election, so it's really meant to be a political thing and not so much about broadband. So everything's political these days, obviously. As far as, again, talking about what the speeds are over time, you can say that these counties are not meeting the definition of broadband, but of course if you keep moving that broadband definition, then that's going to make a difference. So at one point, you look back here, back in 1996, it was 200K by 200K. Most everything then was dial-up. So if you were doing much better than dial-up, then you were doing broadband. And then in 2010, that changed to 4 meg by 1 meg, and it was that way for 5 years. And now since 2015, it's been 25 meg to 3 meg. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the FCC make a change again here in the near future, because people are starting to push toward gigabit speeds. But of course, every time you raise the bar, then you come back and you say, wow, we still have a lot of people that are not meeting broadband speeds because you've increased the definition of what broadband is. So 25 to 3, if somebody's getting 20 megabits per second, they're still doing pretty well. I think we can say they have broadband, they just don't meet the minimum definition of what the FCC says broadband is. And obviously, with more and more people streaming and doing all kinds of things, streaming movies, streaming like I'm doing right now, broadcasting, people need broadband at home. And again, with the fact that we have a lot of people at home now, it's even more important. We can see the importance of that, I think, in times like these. So just a little more information about this RDOF kind of program that they're starting up here. So a total of $20.4 billion to be awarded over 10 years, and a lot of times they will do these awards over 10 years, and they'll do them in separate phases. So there is a phase 1 of this and then a phase 2. They've got to offer, the people that are going to apply for this have to be able to offer commercially at least one voice and one broadband service, meaning data and voice, and 40% of the required number of locations in a state by the end of the third year, and an additional 20% by the end of the fourth year and 5th years of support. So a lot of times the FCC will set up these milestones, so you can't just get the money and then in 10 years say, okay, well, we did the best we could. Now, I think it was CBRS I was talking about, that spectrum I was talking about is it CBRS or C-band? Now I'm getting confused. I can't remember. One of those, they were saying they would have milestones, but it just was going to be after 10 years. I think it was CBRS. So after 10 years, you had to meet certain milestones. They didn't have anything in the middle. Here they have their usual staged kinds of implementation where they want to see that you're making progress if you're going to be getting these grants. And that's really the difference, I think, is these are grants where the government is paying money for these operators to be able to increase service. It's not so much that they're making spectrum available, it's that they're actually providing money. So for us taxpayers, we want to make sure that our tax dollars are going to something that is being used efficiently, and that's what they're trying to do. They have to file USAC reports annually, which is very common on any of these kinds of grants, that you have to file a report showing what you're doing. This is interesting. So the minimum tier right now is exactly what the FCC defines broadband as, 25 by 3. And then you can see the usage allowance there, greater than or equal to 250 gigabytes. And then they have a weight that they give these things that, if you meet certain things, then your particular bid is weighted in that area some. So that's what that weight is. And then interesting here is the latency, the low latency, 100 milliseconds, which is not really low latency. Low latency that people are talking about with things like 5G or low latency DOCSIS, I think, is sub 10 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds, 2 milliseconds, that kind of thing. Very, very low latency. In this case, 100 milliseconds is not that low latency. But I think part of this has to do with satellites, and not your geostationary satellites, but your new satellites that are coming out from people like SpaceX, because geostationary satellites have a latency of like 600, 700 milliseconds. So it's not your best option for broadband. But if it's the only option, you're going to go with that. But of course, SpaceX, as I did a broadcast a month or so ago, SpaceX is in the process of launching lots of low Earth orbit satellites, and their latency is well below 100 milliseconds, should be in the 20, 30, maybe 40 millisecond range, but probably closer to 20 milliseconds, and maybe even dropping at some point, because their satellites are much lower, so they don't have to worry about that. And they have been talking with the FCC, because originally the FCC was saying, we're just not going to let satellite providers bid out for this. And I think the reason was that under Connect America, some satellite operators that were operating geostationary orbits did win some of that money, or did get those grants. And again, the latency is very high. It doesn't really suit itself well to today's internet. But with what SpaceX is doing and the ability to hit anywhere really, anywhere in the world eventually with these satellites, can get fast broadband, 500 megabits per second, 600 megabits per second, and fairly low latency. SpaceX really needs to be a player in this. So I think that's why we see they had this meeting with the FCC, and I think that's why the FCC came out with this 100 millisecond limit, because SpaceX fits well within that. Speaking of SpaceX, they tried to launch a rocket the other day, and it aborted at the very, very last second, really at zero, T-minus 0. It aborted. So they were going to be launching 60 new satellites. That's the way they've been doing it. There's a previous Tech Tuesday where I talked all about SpaceX. Maybe I'll try to remember to put a link to that in a comment here. But so SpaceX launches these satellites in these arrays, 60 at a time, and their plans are to get like 1,000 or more of these satellites up in space, covering every place in the world. Again, with these low Earth orbit satellites that can beam fairly quickly, broadband at high speeds, low latency. This would have been their 5th launch, so I think they've got 200, and I think if they do 60 at a time, I think they got about 240 or so satellites in orbit right now. This was going to put another 60 up, and that just at the last minute, that was aborted. And I love this quote. It says, there are 1,000 ways to launch, there are 1,000 ways a launch can go wrong, but only one way the launch can go right. And that's true. If you think about all the little factors, all the little variables that have to take place, and everything has to be exactly right, and then if it's not, they abort. Everything has to be exactly right. That's the only way it can actually work. But there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. And that's good to know because SpaceX also is looking at putting people in space. So it's good to know that they've got these systems in place that will stop a launch automatically at the very last second if there's something wrong. I did a couple of broadcasts recently on CBRS and then on C-band. These are two new spectrums that are being made available. CBRS is Citizen Broadband Radio Service, and that's actually a spectrum that's being used currently by the government for radar, shipborne radar, land-based radar with the Navy. There are some incumbent WISPs that are using it, and there's a dynamic spectrum sharing system that's going to go on to allow this to continue to be used. And this band is going to be opened up I think it's June, I believe it's in here somewhere. June 25th. They're going to be doing a bidding on the spectrum for this. And this spectrum is going to be, all of it's going to be available as far as for unlicensed spectrum. And then there are going to be segments of it in that unlicensed spectrum that are also going to be licensed. So there'll be dynamic spectrum sharing that will mediate that. But there'll be a licensed area of that, and then there'll also be the incumbent area where nobody can interfere with. So the Navy's still going to have priority access over that band just when they need it. So it's very interesting. I'm going to post a link to that as well on the C-band and on the CBRS Tech Tuesdays. And the other one is C-band. C-band is a band that's currently used by satellite operators that are beaming programming down and then down from satellites and then up to satellites and then down to cable operators, TV stations, that kind of thing. It's the downlink band that they are going to be trying to vacate to allow operators to use that as well. And both of these spectrums are a really good fit for 5G because they're in mid-band spectrum. And 5G mid-band is a really good compromise between distance and speed and penetration of objects and speed. So these mid-band spectrums are very important. I think the CBRS, again, with this auction taking place in June, is going to be a much bigger player much sooner. The issue with C-band is, again, you've got these satellite operators on there, and they're not going to do that auction until December. And even once they do that auction, then these satellite operators then have to make arrangements to clear the portion of the spectrum that the FCC wants to use, which I believe, if I remember, is the lower 100 megahertz. Anyway, so they've got to clear that spectrum. The FCC is offering them some financial incentives to do that, which some people are not very happy with. But it's going to take a long time before the C-band spectrum is available for 5G. So CBRS is going to make a bigger difference there. Now, what this particular article is about Verizon, they're seeing it two different ways. Verizon's in an interesting situation where they don't have much, if any, mid-band spectrum, and they've got a good amount of millimeter wave spectrum, which is the really fast 5G spectrum. That's the spectrum that's really fast, but it doesn't go very far, and it won't go through a wall. So they are offering the millimeter wave 5G in urban areas where they can have lots of people close together, although these days a lot of people are going outside being close together, but it's really good for that. It's great for parks, and it's good for outdoor use. It's very fast. You can get it in a house. They have antenna systems where, as long as you have line of sight, you need line of sight, as long as you have line of sight from wherever your antenna is, you can mount that antenna on the outside of the window, line of sight to a millimeter wave 5G antenna, and then that antenna inside the window, and you can pass it through that way. So they're focusing on urban areas with millimeter wave, and that's the really fast 5G that a lot of people are talking about. But again, they have an issue that they don't have a lot of this mid-band spectrum, so they're seeing it two different ways. They're seeing CBRS maybe actually early on as a good addition to their LTE service, and C-band for 5G. But again, C-band is going to be a long way out, so I have a feeling that, they even say in here that eventually the CBRS could be part of the 5G plan as well, but I got a feeling they're going to be using that for 5G sooner because it's going to be a while before they can get a hold of that C-band spectrum. Other operators T-Mobile's going to be looking really good on mid-band spectrum, especially with the Sprint acquisition. AT&T looks good on that, so they're looking good on mid-band spectrum. Verizon not so much. So I would expect them to be doing something with the CBRS spectrum when it becomes available with 5G. Speaking of 5G and what kind of demand is there? Well, you can have really fast millimeter wave service, or you can have T-Mobile's nationwide 5G, which is really kind of like an LTE service, a little faster. But if your phone is not a 5G phone, it doesn't matter, right? So according to this, the phone sales are rising, but it's still under 1% of devices. And I can understand why. You're hearing a lot about 5G. Again, T-Mobile's been blasting the airwaves with nationwide 5G. Again, that's their low band spectrum right now, so it's not that much faster than LTE. So why would you go out and get a 5G phone? They're a lot more expensive unless you happen to be upgrading and you're saying, well, I'll get this for the future. There's no reason you'd want to scrap your old phone to get a 5G phone. So it will be rising as more people start to hear about it, and I think as this mid-band spectrum becomes more available, and there's more of a reason to have a 5G phone. Right now, I don't see that as being the case. And then there's 6 gigahertz also that some things are happening there. The FCC just recently said that they would be looking at a ruling on that as early as April 23rd. So, and the deal here is that you've got Wi-Fi 6, and it's 6 because, I believe it's 6 because it's the 6th generation. It's not 6 because it's 6 gigahertz. But Wi-Fi 6 is going to support 6 gigahertz, which is very fast. So the reason that this is important would be to get the kind of low latency and capacity on Wi-Fi that you can have on some of these newer broadband networks. Because Wi-Fi gets congested really quick, it can slow down, and there's lots of things in Wi-Fi 6 that will help with that. I'm also going to link to a previous Tech Tuesday broadcast about Wi-Fi 6 down below. I should have done all this in advance, but I'll take care of that. So I'll have some links below on these particular broadcasts if you want to learn more about Wi-Fi 6. So they're going to be doing that soon. And one of the issues with Wi-Fi 6, what they're trying to figure out is how to share that spectrum, because there are people using it now, and it sounds like they're leaning towards an idea of spectrum sharing, kind of like they're doing with CBRS, where you'll be able to have kind of a mediator that will determine who can use the spectrum and make sure that people don't interfere with each other. So they're trying to figure that out. And with the spectrum, it's meant to be short distances. So a lot of the people that are pushing for this feel like it won't be interfering with a lot of the incumbents that are out there, because it's going to be for smaller areas. Wi-Fi could be used internally at a warehouse for some, those kinds of things, a lot related to Internet of Things. The same kind of things that people might use a private 5G network for, Wi-Fi 6 may be good for as well. And then here's just a story. The NCTA calls out CTIA for an ill-conceived last-minute push in 6 gigahertz band. The NCTA is the organization that works with cable operators. The CTIA is one that works with cellular operators. So the cellular operators, again, they're wanting more. They need more spectrum, and they want more mid-band spectrum. So they're saying, hey, why should all of this 6 gigahertz spectrum be used for Wi-Fi? Let's take some of that and use it for 5G. So there's a little competition there going on that. And you've got people lining up in different corners that are supporting both of those ideas. So, all right, so that's what's happening in the world of broadband right now, in addition to everything that's going on with the coronavirus and the pandemic. So thanks for joining me today from my home. And next week is a mystery. I don't know. I may be back in the office. If I'm back in the office and Pete's back in the office, then we will do that broadcast, I would think, on the TrueVision Spectrum tab. If not, I will be back next week with a new topic. If you would like to subscribe, just go ahead and click the subscribe button and then click the bell, and you'll be notified when we're live or when we post a new video. If you like this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate that. Otherwise, I will see you next week for Tech Tuesday. Thanks for joining me.